Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Natha Pada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdnani Patyakshito. Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhakta Maj Jai Rachilo Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Galai Shila Tahate na huilo morachita Jeva nahi buji keva shunite seha Kiyad bhuta chaitanya charit Krishna upajibe priti janibe raserariti Shunile borohoihit Shriyatam nityam giyatam mura Chintyatam bhakta Caitanya-caritamrta. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad, and Sanatana Gosvami Pad, and Raghunath Das Gosvami Pad, and all the others that have blessed Sri Krishna Das Kaviraja Gosvami Pad to give us this Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. Again, today we will resume our discussion. We're in the Madhya Lila, chapter 22, Sanatan Shiksha, discussing Sharanagati. So in our last discussion, we looked at this verse spoken by Akrura in the 10th canto, where a set of reasons are given for taking shelter in Krishna. And the conclusion or the assertion is made that anyone who has wisdom on the basis of these reasons will take shelter in Krishna and not others. So we looked at the comments of Jiva Gosvami and Visvanatha Cakravarti on that verse. So today we'll look at the comments of Sanatana Gosvami. So this verse has gotten quite a lot of attention from our acaryas, and they've given a number of different vantage points by which to appreciate the statements therein. So we'll complete that process today. So from the file that I was in before, I'm picking up from just after the end of the passage from the Sarita Darshani, where it says Sri Sanatan Pad. So Sanatana Gosvami has commented on this in his commentary on Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is something we discussed some months back when we did a series on the Prakaran of Sharanagati or Sharanapati in Hari Bhakti Vilas. We'll review just this one comment. No harm in a little redundancy when something this sublime is being discussed. And then we'll also see how he further elaborates in the Brihad Vaishnav Toshani. So, with that, I will begin. Sri Sanatan Pad also further illuminates the significance of Sri Krishna's qualities that make him most worthy of being taken shelter in, as well as the reasoning in this regard being offered in this verse as follows. So I'm also going to go through the mool as we go this time, because that way we can draw out a little bit more of the differences in the viewpoints that are expressed throughout the comments. So he says, Tatvato param ka samyat, who would take shelter in anyone other than you? Samyak yat gachet, the meaning of the verb samayat is would fully take, that is, would go to for shelter. Tatra hetutvena visheshana chatushtayam. The four qualifiers, or visheshanas, of you, meaning of Krishna, are stated as reasons in that regard. That is, as reasons why no wise person would approach anyone other than Bhagavan for shelter. Thus, the sense is as follows. Bhakta eva priyo yasya, rita satya giravag yasya suhrid nirupadi kripa karinaha, kritamatmano bhaktasya cha janati iti tata tasmat. So, what wise person would fully approach a shelter other than you? He to whom bhaktas alone are dear, whose words are truthful, who is well-wishing, that is, an unconditional bestower of grace, and who knows what has been done for himself and for a bhakta of himself. So I'll just briefly comment here that one of the unique points that Sanatana Gosvami brings out here is this concept of gratitude, or kritagyata. He extends it to the bhakta. In other words, he's illustrating how dear bhaktas are to Bhagavan, in that he's considering that not only is Bhagavan keenly aware of something that has been done for himself by another, but when someone else is really dear to you, then you feel very grateful to a third person when they do something even for that person who's dear to you. You yourself feel benefited or enriched by that, or you feel a sense of indebtedness to that third person. So by extending this circle of gratitude, so to speak, to include the bhakta, he, you could say, emphasizes also the first point made, that he's bhakta priya, that he is someone for whom bhaktas alone are dear. So, meaning the dearness of his bhaktas to him is unlike the dearness of anyone else. So even the gratitude that he feels includes them. Okay, so then he says, Atev, bhavan bhajato janasya, atev surhida satchitasya, yadva priyatvena svikritasya, janasya, sarvan abhita kaman abhi abhayam yatha syat iti va atmanam api dadati. Therefore, you bestow all thoroughly desired objects, or you bestow desired objects in a manner whereby fearlessness shall come about for the recipient. And you bestow even your own self upon a person worshipping you, who is thus, quote, well-wishing, that is, of good heart, suhrida, or alternately, upon a person accepted by you on account of their being dear to you. So here he's playing a little bit with the prefix abhi. So in the verse itself, you can see at the end of the third line, it says abhi kaman. So he gives two interpretations to this prefix abhi. So generally, it's understood that abhi means something in full or in exceedance of something else. So it's given initially as thoroughly desired objects, or those things that are most desired by someone. You bestow that, because it's one thing to give charity of stuff that's nice or maybe useful to somebody, but not necessarily entirely useful to the person it's actually being given to. But it's another thing to give someone what's actually really useful and desired by that person themselves. That is a far greater act of benefit or favor of the person. So he's a bestower not just of desired objects, but what is, thoroughly desired or greatly desired by the recipient. So that's one interpretation. Or the second interpretation is he takes abhi as abhayam. So bhi can also mean, is also a word synonymous with bhaya or fear. So abhi meaning fearlessness. So he gives even desired objects in a manner whereby fearlessness shall come about. In other words, he makes the people feel completely safe and fulfilled through his favoring of them. Means he really favors them and gives them what matters most. And then he also here gives a double interpretation of the word bhajataha. So here bhajataha meaning a worshipper or someone who's doing bhajan or service. There's another sense, the root bhaj typically is interpreted to mean seva, but bhaj can also mean to take part in something, to participate in something, to accept something or connect with something. So taken in that second sense, he interprets it alternately as this, quote, upon a person accepted by you. So it can then, this suhrida bhajata can mean either people worshipping you, meaning bhaktas who are of good heart, in other words, who are worshipping you out of love for you or out of the love in their hearts for you. Or it can mean that you give this to people who you accept, that the bhajatas are those who you're accepting. And why are you accepting them? Because they are suhrida, because they are of good heart, or because they have, he takes it here secondly as priya, that they are dear to you. So like this, multiple ways of reading it. Then he goes on, bhajanena yasya bhavataha swata upachaya labho nasti nityam paripurnatvat abhajane cha apachayo nasti nityam swataha paripurnatvena ananyapekshatvat. So he says, as a result of receiving worship, you are he for whom, that is for you, accumulation, meaning gain, does not occur on account of your being eternally fully complete. Or you could take it as completely fulfilled in and of your own self. And as a result of non-worship, i.e. not receiving worship, your own diminution also does not occur on account of your being non-dependent on anyone else, by virtue of your being eternally fully complete or completely fulfilled in and of your own self. So because you're completely fulfilled in yourself, you don't gain or lose by anything anyone else does. So this is in general the concept, but he elaborates now, or he instantiates this in the perspective of Akrura, which is this is an additional, you could say, appreciation of the verse, which we don't see in the other commentaries. So he says, even he, meaning you, who neither gain nor lose in any way, however, being subdued by bhakti, bestow your own self upon your bhaktas. So sopi bhavan bhakti paravashaha syan atmanam dadati. So although you don't have anything to gain by doing it, you still give yourself to the bhaktas. And then he says, Yadva tena nija upachaya apachayo parama karunyadina manyamanam api bhagavantam prati nija bhaktatvat drishtya parama vinayena srimad akrurasya tadrishyukti geya. That alternately this type of statement of Srimad Akrura to Bhagavan is to be understood to have been made on account of great reverence for Bhagavan, based on vision of himself being a bhakta, even when there is on Bhagavan's part conceiving of an experience of his own accumulation and diminution on account of his own great compassion and so forth in regard to his bhaktas. That is, even though Bhagavan does feel that he has experiences of gain and loss in the midst of his interactions with his bhaktas, still Akrura speaks of Bhagavan as having no such experience out of a feeling of great reverence for Bhagavan. So, I think that's clear, but In other words, Akrura is overwhelmed by Bhagavan's greatness and speaking in this way, but Sanatana Gosvami is saying, well, but we won't take that completely literally, or in other words, if it's really true that Bhagavan doesn't gain or lose thereby, then you might think, well then, maybe this isn't that important to him, or maybe he's not all that involved in this. So Sanatana Gosvami is preserving the idea that for Bhagavan himself, when he's absorbed in this lila under the influence of Yogamaya, these things really do matter, and there is a deep sense of loss and gain and something being at stake and something being unfulfilled, yet that can coexist with his omnipotence and so forth, and his, atmaramatva, his aptakamata and all of this. So then he says, Yadva upachaya pachayo neti vriddhi hrasa hinataya parama mahatma taya parakashta darshita tatad bhutam api atmanam dadati bhaktavashyatam karuti iti artaha ayam api sharanagamane hetur gyeya. So alternately, this statement, without any accumulation for or diminution of yourself, the pinnacle of Bhagavan's being the most supremely great on account of having no increase or decrease is shown, and although he is such, he still bestows his own self upon his bhaktas, meaning he exhibits the capability of being subdued by his bhaktas. This too is to be understood as a reason for approaching his shelter, and thus 5 reasons for Bhagavan's being the sole true shelter worthy of being approached are stated in this verse. He holds bhaktas dear, he is truthful, he is unconditionally gracious, he is cognizant of and reciprocates in accord with all that has been done for him by fulfilling all the desires of those who worship him, and he gives even his own self to his worshippers and becomes subdued by them while also remaining undiminished thereby. So this is how Sanatana Gosvami gives it here in the commentary on Sharanagati and Hari Bhakti Vilas. So what's, you could say, unique about this commentary is what he's emphasizing at the end, that although he has this greatness, although he has nothing to gain, he still gives of himself and reciprocates in full, not only with actions done for himself, but even actions done for his bhaktas, we can take it. So this is one reading, and now we'll look at the second reading. This comes from the Brihad Vaishnava Toshani. So he says, Ata param devamishvaram va kasharanam samyag yat ashrayet. Therefore, who would take shelter in full, that is, take refuge, in the shelter of any other deva or ishvara? So here, he's taking it now in a, not just in a sense of whether one should take shelter in Bhagavan or not in comparison to things of the world, but saying even in comparison to other forms of Bhagavan or other devatas that people often worship, even in comparison to them, Krishna specifically is who is worthy of being taken shelter in. So that's another way of framing the import of the rhetorical question. So he says, Sam shabdena karachit katanchit tvat praptyartam eva va ashrayat iti bodhyate. Who would take refuge in another deva or ishvara, specifically for the sake of somehow at some time attaining you, since only taking shelter in you leads to attaining you, and taking shelter in another deva or ishvara will lead only to attainment of that other deva or ishvara and not you. So taking it that for Akrura at this moment, Krishna is felt to be all in all to him. So Krishna is thus his ultimate, he has this perception of Krishna being the ultimate thing to achieve. And now how to achieve it? Well, how to get you other than come to you? Why would I go anywhere else to anyone else to come only to you? So this is conveyed by the prefix sam. So he says sam iyat. So there's this prefix of completion added to the conjugated form iyat. So that's, in other words, he's drawing out this comparative element from the presence of the prefix. So now he analyzes the word pandit. So he says, Sadasad vivechika buddhi panda, tadvangs chet tam eva samashrayat iti artaha. Discriminative understanding of the real and the unreal, the sat and the asat, which you could take it as right and wrong, or good and bad, or essence and non-essence. Take sat or asat in whatever context you prefer. To be able to discriminate between these two things, or grasp what is sat and what is asat, that is called wisdom, or panda. So one who has panda is a pandita. One who has wisdom is a wise man, so to speak. So if one possessed of that is, if one is a wise person, pandita, one shall take refuge fully in you alone. This is the meaning. So now the reasons why the panditas arrive at this conclusion are stated. Tatra hitavaha, bhakta eva priyo yasya tasmat iti bhakta vatsalyam. So number one, your affection for bhaktas on account of your being he to whom bhaktas alone are dear. So here Sanatana Gosvami is taking each of these causes mentioned in the verse and then mapping them onto a particular quality of Krishna. So he's saying that if you are someone to whom bhaktas are dear, then what is that quality in you that merits being taken shelter of, merits you being worthy of being taken shelter in? Bhakta vatsalya, that you have this special affection for bhaktas. Number two, your affection for the distressed, dina, on account of your being he whose words, which are characterized by your statement in 11:26:33, quote, I certainly am the shelter of the afflicted, are truthful. So now he in other words, conceives of the quality dina vatsalyam. The first quality was bhakta vatsalyam. The second quality is dina vatsalyam, that he is affectionate to those in need, or those in distress, or those in a humbled condition, because he avows himself to be, and he proves his words to be truthful. So bhakta vatsalyam, dina vatsalyam, and then the third, he says, suhrido nirupadi kripa karinaha iti hinart adhika sadakatvam. That your being he who does the most for the sake of the destitute, on account of your being, quote, well-wishing, or suhrida. So here, he's taking the word suhrit, or being well-wishing, or being of good heart, to being someone who is unconditionally kind to others, or who favors or shows compassion to persons unconditionally, meaning not for the sake of the benefit that you get from being a good person, or the benefit you get from helping somebody in the form of praise or an expected favor in return, or what have you. So, you are unconditionally kind to others, and he interprets that further. This is a phrase that I find interestingly many times in Sanatana Goswami's writings. He uses this phrase, hin arta adhika sadaka, or hin art adhika, that he does a lot for the sake of those who are in a little position, so to speak, or he does a lot for those who have little. So this is the third quality. And then the fourth. He adds to this. He adds an alternate version of the third. So he says, Yadva aparadepi sushobanam hridayasya tasmad iti aparada grahanam kritam. So he says, where is it? Alternately, your non-acceptance of offense from others on account of your being a very bright heart, or suhrida, even in the case of offense having been committed against you. So here he's taking the word suhrit in the sense of being someone who doesn't take offense, someone who has such a good heart that they don't allow their heart to be hardened by even an action which is an expression of hard-heartedness or of an undue regard from another. So someone who can, not allow the negative energy to overcome their positive energy, to put it in a broad sense, who has this sushobhana hridaya, this very bright or very, energetic heart, then in that person won't take offense even when offense is committed. So in that way also someone is nirupadi kripakarina, or unconditionally compassionate. So if you take shelter in someone, but that someone will become, very harsh to you if you do the slightest thing wrong, then that might not be the kind of person you want to take shelter in. Some let's say, very powerful figure who might have the power to help you greatly, but who could also, exert wrath upon you greatly if you do something they don't like. That might not be the safest shelter for you. But someone who has both great capacity to shelter as well as this type of noble disposition or this tendency not to be offended, that will then be truly a very safe shelter for you. So that supports the theme. And then the fourth one, he says, Sviyam parakiyam cha janati, iti tata tasmad iti sarvaloka hitartam, sada sarvanusandana kritam uktam. And fourth, you're always looking after everyone for the sake of all people's well-being, on account of your being he who knows, that is, sustains regard for, those who are his own, as well as others, that is, those who do not regard themselves as belonging to you. So I personally find this very satisfying that Sanatana Gosvami adds this point, that by Bhagavan's being said to have the quality here of kritagyata. So this is how he's interpreting the idea of, quote, gratitude or kritagyata here, as someone who maintains awareness of what others do, regardless of whether that person is, quote unquote, one's own or another. In other words, one looks at the merits, or he looks at the merits of everyone's actions, irrespective of whether that person is, part of the in-group or part of the out-group, so to speak. And if you take it in the worldly context, there's a common tendency to see the actions of your own family members or members of your own nation or members of whatever circle you identify in a positive light, but then to overlook the merits in the actions of those who are outside of that in-group. So to have true sense of gratitude or a true sense of recognition of the value of things means that one values those things for their merits, irrespective of who performs them, whether they're part of your in-group or part of, what some might consider an opposing group or an enemy group or whatever. But to have true recognition for the merits of actions, irrespective of what might be their trappings or who might be their agents, will be to truly have regard for what has been done, or kritagyata. So here he's describing Bhagavan as being such, as recognizing, what is done on the part of all, and not only that, but reciprocating with that, or, sarva anusandana kritam, looking after or seeing to the well-being of everyone. So in other words, he looks after the well-being even of all the people who don't believe in him, or of all the atheists of the world, or what have you. He's the, suhridam sarva bhutanam. He's the friend of all, the unconditional well-wisher and supporter of every living entity. He will unfailingly uphold the, system of karma and the functioning of all the natural laws for everyone, irrespective of whether those persons identify with him or not, or worship him or not. He has this recognition for whatever is being done, and he upholds that. So there's, this is, you could say that this quality in Bhagavan is what the entire concept of fairness in the world, in one sense, rides on Bhagavan having this quality. So, if you're looking for someone truly worthy of taking shelter in, then this is what you want, unless, of course, you prefer a cheating system where you can, bribe someone to favor you instead of your opponents. But if you want a real shelter that's truly good for you as well as others, then this is what you need. So, these are the 4 qualities he mentions. Now he gives examples from Bhagavan's character as perceived by Akrura for each of these qualities. So he says, Visheshananam esham yatuttaram ashrayana hitutayam shrishtyam. Okay, first he says, there is superiority among these reasons for taking shelter in Sri Bhagavan, as per the succession of these qualifiers. That is, the 4 reasons to take shelter in Sri Bhagavan mentioned in the verse are stated in order from lesser to greater. So this is a hermeneutic that we see often in Sanatana Gosvami's work, where he will take the word order in the verse as also having, you could say, rhetorical effect, and imply also the intent of the statement. So he's saying that this choice of phrasing is intentional and intended to convey that what is stated last is of the greatest importance. This is both in Western literature as well as in Sanskrit literature. You see this type of compositional device where sometimes in English they have what they call the periodic sentence, where the point that you end the sentence with creates a natural effect or a natural resonance, an emphasis on that element that was stated last. So you find that also in the compositional strategies in Sanskrit literature. So that's where this type of interpretation is coming from. So in other words, the fact that something is stated last is stressing that it's the most important of things. And that also is used in the way grammatical treatises are composed and other, I forget. There's another place where that hermeneutic from grammar is cited here in the Caitanya-caritamrta. Something Paravalavan, I forget how it goes, but that among 2 things stated, the latter is always to be considered predominant, is the principle. Okay, anyway. Etani-cha griha agamanena asyasye bhavato geham iti tad vyakya satyatapadanena gopi vishayak aparada grahanena griha nirman adi nijakritya gyanena cha atmanam uddishya kramena uktani iti api geya. So this is quite nice. So Sanatana Gosvami contextualizes all this into Akrura's perspective and says these reasons, furthermore, are to be understood to be stated in order by Akrura with reference to himself. Why? First, because of Sri Krishna's coming to his house, which shows Bhagavan's quality of holding bhaktas dear. So Akrura had offered himself to Krishna, had begged him to come to his home, and Bhagavan did. So therefore Akrura says, you are someone who holds bhaktas dear, because his action of coming to his house has proved that he holds Akrura dear. Second, because of Sri Bhagavan substantiating the truthfulness of his statement, made earlier in verse 10:41-17, I will come to your home. And secondly, he says, your word is truthful because you kept your promise. You promised me you would come, and now you have. So you've shown dearness to me, you've also shown your truthfulness in keeping your word. Number 3, because of Bhagavan's non-acceptance of his offense, the object of which was the gopis, on account of Akrura's depriving the gopis of Krishna, as they cried out in dismay when he took Krishna away to Mathura in his chariot. So this is quite something. In other words, that section there in chapter 39 of Akrura driving Krishna out of Vrindavan as the gopis wail and throw themselves in front of the chariot, and he has to dart, weave in and out of them to prevent himself from running over them. And when we understand from the Rasa Lila and other passages earlier in Bhagavatam that how profoundly dear the gopis are to Krishna, that they're more dear to him than his own life, and now Krishna has Akrura almost running them over. How will Bhagavan feel at that moment where this person who he's, so to speak, cast in this role of taking him away is like nearly killing these gopis physically, in the sense of nearly running them over, and emotionally, you could say more than killing them by depriving them of the presence of Krishna. So you might think that this would be something that was deeply painful to Krishna. You might think that the person who came and was the agent of this most agonizing, tragic moment of being taken away from Braj, that Krishna might not hold such a favorable attitude towards such a person. But rather, Sanatana Gosvami takes it here that Krishna takes no offense at this, or in other words, he doesn't hold Akrura directly accountable for any of this. He doesn't, even though such, heart-wrenching, scene takes place, such an intense experience of separation, which is, the most intense of all possible pains for those who have, a profundity of prema as is found in Braj. Even the agent who's causing that kind of pain, Krishna is not taking offense at their action. So really he is Surida, or really he has a well-wishing disposition, or a heart that's not has a tendency to be angered or to take things in a negative way. If there's any way to prove that, I would think this is, quite near the top. Although, of course, the statement of Uddhava coming next will also, illustrate this, but we'll get to that. So this is how he is perceived by Akrura to be Suhrida. That Akrura also must have later felt, as he understood in time, how profound the love between Krishna and the gopis and among the Brajabasis more broadly was, then how painful was the act that he committed for them. This must have also undoubtedly weighed on him deeply. And then the fact that he would then be aware of how pained Krishna was by the pain of those Brajabasis, and then to see that Krishna was always kind to him. Krishna never, took exception to that, so to speak. That must have astonished him, that he could have been the agent in causing the most profound emotional pain for Krishna, and yet Krishna is kind to him and even coming to visit him. This must have made him marvel. And then finally, he says, because of Bhagavan's awareness of his own duties, such as constructing a home and so forth. So how does he show his kritagyata, or his gratitude? Then he refers to Krishna, quote, constructing a home. So what does that refer to? It's a little bit cryptic, but I understand it like this. Sri Krishna is looking after all of his family members, all people in society, and all living beings throughout the universe by his observance of his duties, such as his protecting his relatives by erecting a palace at Dwaraka, as a safe haven for them when they faced simultaneous attacks from Jarasandha and Kaliyavana. So Krishna, in the course of his Leela, is acting to bring about the well-being of all, both his family members, his intimate companions, his bhaktas, as well as all people, all living beings in general. So, after the killing of Kamsa's wives were daughters of Jarasandha. They were furious that Krishna had killed their husband, so Jarasandha wanted to avenge the death of his son-in-law. As we know, in Indian society, there's often, the father of a daughter also typically takes great pride in the successes of his son-in-law, and conversely can be, quite upset if someone harms the son-in-law. So Jarasandha, one of the most powerful, figures of that era, who also had a great deal of pride and sense of boldness due to the near near immortality that he achieved by means of a boon, took it upon himself to lay siege to Mathura. So Krishna, to protect all of his family members, to protect his parents, to protect everyone who'd been subject to Kamsa's, exploitation of them, he magically constructed the palace of Dwarka and transported them there to protect them. So this is showing how thoroughly he looks after his own people. Not that he, had some ambition to become the king and therefore killed his own uncle to get the throne, and then there's a war, and then a bunch of the subjects all have to die because of his royal ambitions, which is sadly the story of so many historical tales where massive amounts of common people all die to, flatter the egos of the few who have the power and use everyone else as fodder in their ego battles over their own desires to be perceived as great or powerful or have some type of so-called legacy and all of this. So someone could look at Krishna in this way and say, oh look, he's just ambitious for the throne, he killed his own uncle and then used all his own people to fight off his uncle's, father-in-law, and, this is all just, destruction of society to suit these people fighting over thrones. No, not like that at all. Rather, Krishna isn't doing this because he had any ambition for the throne. When he gets to Dwarka, he doesn't even take the throne. He puts Ugrasen in power. He makes it clear that this is not about him having the prime seat or anything like that. So he meticulously ensures that due to these stresses over the throne, the common people are not, brought into the fold or have to suffer as a result. So he protects them, he establishes Dwarka, etc. So Sanatana Gosvami is referring to this as an illustration of Krishna's Kritagyata, of how he shows recognition for the support that all the people in society show him by amply providing for all of their needs and protecting them from other dangers, etc. So Akrura must have been profoundly impressed by this because he was right in the middle of this whole battle. He was one of the assistants of Kamsa, but then obviously became partial to Krishna and then saw how Krishna managed all of this. This must have been, amazing to him. So this is how Sanatana Gosvami, contextualizes Akrura's remark. And now, of course, this establishing of the palace and so forth happened later after this exact remark was made in the set of events in the Bhagavatam, if I remember accurately, but no harm. In other words, we can take it in a little broader way. Okay, then he says, well-wishing in the second occurrence of this word, modifying bhajataha, means dear, on account of being a worshipper. So you wouldn't, if you were translating it based on this commentary, you wouldn't translate suhrida as well-wishing here. You would just translate it as, being someone who's dear to the heart or something like this. So what he means is that he gives everything that is so desired to those who are dear on account of being worshippers of himself. Now here, Sanatana Gosvami gets clever and gives another interpretation, as he often does, by playing with the sandhi. So you could interpret this in the third line where he says, Suhrido bhajata. You could interpret it also as Suhrida abhajataha, and that there was a negating prefix, an a, before bhajataha that got elided. So if you look at it in that way, then you have a Suhrida who's a non-performer of bhajan. In other words, someone who's Suhrida but who doesn't perform worship. So that would certainly be an unlikely, it would be unlikely that you would assume that's initially what was meant. But, of course, to draw out, to further relish the potential of these words, Sanatana Gosvami brings this, and this is how he takes it. Alternately, by means of a coalescence of an A, there is indication of Bhagavan's affection for friends, bandhus, on account of the intended sense in that case being even a non-worshipper, well-wisher. That is, a person possessed only a friendliness who does not engage in worship. So what he means to say is that Krishna doesn't just bestow all the desired things upon those who worship him, but he bestows all of that even upon his own friends, even upon his own intimate companions who don't worship him. In other words, he's not hung up on being worshipped. He's actually all about having these loving relationships, and those who are, his bandhus, or his suhridas, his intimate companions and friends, he fulfills all of their desires, even when they don't worship him. In other words, even when they just play with him or relate with him in a more casual manner. So that's an additional interpretation. Then we'll come to the final bit here. So he says, where was I? Oh, okay. And so the whole quality then, just to recap, so he's drawing out these qualities that are the causes of the worthiness of being taken shelter in. So we had Bhakta Vatsalya, Dina Vatsalya, then the third one was, what did he call it lastly? He didn't give an exact word for that, but this, friendliness on his part, or what he called hinardika sadakatam, giving more than even what, giving greatly to those who are of a little position. And then the last one he calls bandhu vatsalya. So to put more simply, you have bhakta vatsalya, dina vatsalya, and bandhu vatsalya. So he's affectionate to bhaktas, he's affectionate to the humble or those in a state of need, and he's affectionate to bandhus, to friends, or to those whom he has a natural, hearty relation. Okay, so lastly, idamapi purvavat kaman abhishtartan vanchitati tamapi dadasi iti ashayena aha atmanamapi dadati tadbashyam karoti iti artaha. So he raises a purva paksha here. Because of the thought, that is the expectation of the following objection, this too is like before. You bestow desired objects, and even that which is beyond what is desired. That is, having heard the description of Bhagavan in the verse so far, someone may consider that what is described is not yet anything completely new and unique, that would merit taking shelter specifically in Bhagavan Sri Krishna alone, since other devas or isharas may also be thought by some to act in the same manner as has been described. So okay, he gives people what they want, so does a desire tree. That doesn't make him so great. Okay, he gives people even more than what they want. He gives them fully what they want or what's in their best interest. Well, Shiv Thakur also does that, someone may say. In other words, that itself doesn't necessarily merit he alone being taken shelter in to the exclusion of all others. So, to indicate that further speciality, then these final points are made. So he says, Akrura says, you bestow even your own self, that is, you exhibit the capability of being subdued by him, that is, by a bhakta, or even just by a friend, meaning whether you take that pronoun to refer to the bandhu or to the bhakta from earlier on, in either case it applies. So you give even more than what people want, you give people what's ultimately best for them, and you give your own self, and that's effortless for you. This is the meaning. So he says, where am I? Tatcha nirupadi bandhu tat eva aha yasya bhagavata upachayo bhajanad labhat apachayo abhajanad hani to nasta iti. So that, furthermore, is only because of your being an unconditional friend, or a nirupadi bandhu. So you favor your bandhus, and you also act like a bandhu, an unconditional bandhu, an unconditional friend for others. So thus he says, accumulation, upachai, that is gain from worship that is received, and diminution, apuchai, that is loss from an absence of receiving worship, Bhagavan has neither of these things. Yadyapi bhaktanam bhakti sukalabhina bhagavato apachaya syat tatapi tatoktir bhaktya vinayat dainyat cha. Although there shall be an accumulation on Bhagavan's part too, as a result of his bhaktas gaining the joy of bhakti. That is, although Bhagavan does gain something from being worshipped by his bhaktas, in the form of gaining the satisfaction of seeing his bhaktas feeling satisfied, that is certainly a gain. He does gain something, even if you say, oh, he doesn't gain anything. Well, he feels the joy of making his bhaktas happy. That's a gain if there is one. If there ever was a gain, it's that. Still, the statement is such that is still Akrura says Bhagavan has no sort of accumulation. Why? On account of Akrura's reverence and humility out of bhakti. So you can say, yes, Bhagavan really does gain from being worshipped because he gains the joy of giving joy to his bhaktas, but Akrura is speaking this out of humility and great reverence for Bhagavan, so he's not observing that exact aspect and speaking in a slightly more limited or conventional sense. That's one way of seeing it. Or, yadva, kamanam adane upachayo nasti, atmano dhane pi, apachayo nasti, achintya aishvarya tvat. So this is how Chakravarti Pad took it in our previous discussion. Alternately, there is no accumulation on Bhagavan's part in the case of non-bestowal of objects of desire upon worshippers who have made offerings to him, and there is no diminution on Bhagavan's part even in the case of bestowing his own self, much less anything else upon worshippers, because of his inconceivable capability. That is, his capacity to give infinitely and still remain undiminished. So in other words, he's omniscient, he's omnipotent, so this is all possible. There's no difficulty in this. You could take it like that. Yadva, Sanatan Pad's not done, a third alternate. Atmanam swasya adane upachayo vridi nasti, purnata parama kashta prapte, apachayascha kayo nasti, sada eva vikaratvat. Alternately, there is no accumulation, meaning increase, on Bhagavan's part in the case of non-bestowal of his own self upon worshippers because of his being possessed of the ultimate pinnacle of completeness. And there is no diminution, meaning decrease, on Bhagavan's part in such a case because of his always verily being without transformation. So he's already greater than the greatest and always becoming greater, and he's immutable, so he doesn't gain, he doesn't lose. So therefore these points are made, so you can say this is based on his ontological nature, or it's based on Akrura making a reverential remark. Tatas chatmana samagrasya danam abhipretam. Thus, furthermore, bestowal indeed of the entirety of his own self is intended. That is, thus Akrura is speaking of Bhagavan literally becoming subdued by his bhaktas, acting in accord with their wishes, and feeling himself to belong to them. So this is, I think, a nice twist here at the end, to say that, yes, Akrura being someone with Mahatma Gyan, or this awareness of Bhagavan's greatness, or Aishvarya, may be saying these things from that perspective, but at the same time he's saying that, acknowledging that greatness is enabling him to have this type of intimate exchange where he does come under the will of his bhakta, he does reciprocate with their wishes, he does feel a sense of being of togetherness or connectedness with his bhaktas as an expression or by virtue of that omnipotence that he possesses, not, in contrast to it, or not that is detracting from that. So, here you go. Now we have Sanatana Gosvami's two interpretations to add to Jiva Gosvami's, Sridhara Swami, and Visvanatha Cakravarti. So, the purpose of the whole discussion, as we mentioned previously, was to say, why is Krishna worthy of being taken shelter in? Why would someone want to shelter themselves there? Because, you'll find the ultimate fearlessness, the ultimate safety, the ultimate person to love and to be loved by, who will reciprocate with you genuinely and honestly and to an infinite degree and have no loss or diminution thereby. And by you making such a deep relationship with him, you're also not denying that wonderful person to others, but he's also still available to everyone else too, and has the capability of having such depth of exchange on an infinite scale, and yet still being fully, responsibly, personally present to you. So if there's anyone to love, why not love him? If there's anyone to take shelter in him, then why not him? So we require this conviction. This, if Sharanagati, as we're discussing, is the premise of taking up the path of bhakti, is the premise of, or the entire, the primary symptom of the presence of Shraddha. If Shraddha is what makes us eligible and able to follow the path of bhakti, then we want clarity, we want a strength of grasp upon this. In the Ragbart-machandrika, when Chakravarti Pad is talking about not just the adhikar, but the underpinning of the adhikar. In other words, as the rule of Shastra is said to be the motivator for the practice of Vaidhi Bhakti, as intense desire or lobha is said to be the motivator of Raganuga Bhakti, then it's explained that these two things create a prabritti, or an inclination to engage in bhakti, and that it's the strength of that inclination, or that prabritti, which is like the force that's causing someone to proceed on this path. So how will we succeed on the path? With the strength of that prabritti. Just as if you're driving in a car, if your engine has whatever horsepower it has, that's how much power you have to drive forward and get down the road. Or that's how much, the strength of the fuel you're burning in your tank to go forward. So hearing all of this katha can ultimately have the effect of solidifying, of fortifying, of strengthening that prabritti. And Chakravarti Pad, this is just something I happen to be working on recently, and it'll come later when we get to the Raganuga Bhakti section here in this chapter. But just as a quick snapshot, because I thought it was so fundamental, there's one place, it's not in the Sindhu commentaries, but just in the Ragbart-machandrika, where he defines then even what is a prabritti, or what is the inclination that gives rise to the motivation, which is said to be the eligibility for the path. So he then defines the prabritti just like this: Tat chikirsha sunishchaya. Tat chikirsha sunishchaya. That it is a desire to do that, in other words, a desire to enact bhakti, and sunishchoy, it is a firm resolve. So if you compound that, since it's in apposition and you can take one of them adjectively, as if a firmly resolved desire to act. So all this discussion and whatever contemplation that we're able to do upon it in our own life, which is our own responsibility. We can listen to Harikatha, but if we just listen and then do other things and don't think about it, we don't contemplate it, we don't do manana, then we won't get as much benefit out of hearing these things. But what will be the fruit, or what will be the effect of that contemplation and this hearing? It will be that there will solidify this firmly resolved desire to act. And as much as that becomes strong, then all the future richness of the path will unfold and come. Just as if you have some, rickety old car that can barely burn its gas, you'll be, struggling down the road. But if you have, some very powerful, strongly running engine, you can just zip right to the goal. So we can think in one way that hearing this type of content about why Krishna is worthy of being taken shelter in, this is to nourish directly that very core thing that is driving the whole process, that sense of certainty and that desire to engage in bhakti. So watering the bhakti lata, watering the plant with the water of Shravan Kirtan, this is how and why we engage in these things. So I'll conclude here, and we'll get one more verse in the next discussion, the verse of Uddhava that we mentioned earlier, which further develops this theme, why Krishna is so worthy of being taken shelter in. And then the discussion will move to what it actually means to take shelter in him. What is Sharanagati? That's how the Prakaran advances. So I stop here. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share. Yes.
Nam Shri Krishna Sharan Dasa. So I wanted to, this is a very simple question that I'm going to ask, but just for the sake of increasing my Shraddha, I wanted to just double check something. So looking at the Bhagavatam verse under discussion, the 10:48-26,
Okay.
Translation says that Sri Krishna bestows all thoroughly desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper
Yes.
of him. I just want to double check, is that like really true? Like, that's not just like Arthavada or something. That's like really true, right? Or it's a simple question, but I just wanted to double check that it's true.
We see instances in the Puranas where it's meant to be taken literally, insofar as persons are described as performing such and such worship and then reaching such and such result. So to have faith that the injunctions of the Shastra and adherence to them, has a power to produce that type of effect, that will be fundamental. That goes back to the whole Mimamsa concept of there being, like, quote unquote, power in adherence to the injunction. So when Bhagavan is said, or these statements are said to have this effect, then it's said that yes, according to yadrishi shraddha, tadrishi siddhi, that the attainment that we get will be in accord with the shraddha that we have. So as far as we have shraddha and we act to that extent, we can be confident in receiving the result. And be careful what you wish for. In other words,
right.
If you worship, as we talked about earlier, that verse, sarva kama sarva kamo va moksha kamo daradi, says, worship Krishna, whether you want all the things of the world, or you don't want anything in the world, or you want moksha, whatever you want, just worship Krishna, and that's the best way to get it. That's the liberal side of the Bhagavatam, is saying whatever you want, it doesn't matter, but just worship Krishna to get it. Just have this much faith that worshiping Krishna is the most effective means of getting what you want. And then the Bhagavatam starts out like this, and then little by little starts cutting off all these things that that you're really better off not wanting. To the point where you end up with the gopis who want nothing but Krishna and Krishna alone, and so on.
Right. Okay. No, that's good. So I guess one follow-up question would be, so I understand that the word thoroughly here is important, as you were describing today, but I was also wondering if we just remove the word thoroughly and just say, Krishna bestows all desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper of him, would it still be true? Like, I understand the thoroughly is important, but if we take the thoroughly, would it still destroy the truth value? Or
no, it's certainly. Just as that verse I just quoted, akama sarva kamova. Even if whatever you want, you can want everything in the world, and the implication is that Krishna can give that. So the obi there, you can say, is added for effect. But the idea is that Krishna can bestow whatever desired object you want.
Okay. I'll be careful what I wish for, because I might actually get it. Or I probably will get it. So eventually, so I shouldn't wish for something bad. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. All right, well, I think I'll sign off here. And if we're so blessed, next week we'll continue further in this discussion of Sharanagati. We'll come to this famous statement of Uddhava that had Pundarik Vidnidhi beside himself, and which is a source of great joy for all bhaktas. It also had Nityananda Prabhu beside himself at the first meeting with Mahaprabhu. So something that's very into the core of our Gaudiya literature, and a famous statement of the Bhagavatam. We'll look at our acaryas' commentaries on that verse in our next discussion. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.